Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm Dr. Trill with Free to Feed. It is my honor and pleasure to bring to you today MapMyMilk and their founder. I am very, very excited because not only is this such an important topic, which is the deep diving into logging and tracking the intake and baby's intake and symptomology. We're going to deep dive into not only like how, but the why and then the what to do with it, right? Because then we have all this data and what do we do with it? And so, first and foremost, Maya, thank you so much for joining and for having this conversation with us and for all of the work that you have done. So, I would love to start out with tell us a little bit about your journey, like what brought you to this space and what have you created?
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. Trill, for having me. Yes, so I'm the founder of MapMyMilk, which is a tracking tool for families struggling with infant food reactivity. I'm an occupational therapist. I work in a cancer hospital, and I'm the mother of two, a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, both of whom had cow's milk protein allergy as infants, one of whom turned out to be a totally different trigger. It wasn't dairy at all. And in going through that process of eliminating dairy and soy for months, not seeing improvements, and just struggling with a way to organize that process of collecting data in terms of what I was eating, how she was showing symptoms, and trying to track the timeline and the eliminations and the reintroductions, and just trying to have it all in an organized way led me to developing a tool that I very much needed personally and that I know a lot of other moms also need.
And so, your background then, you said you're an occupational therapist.
Mhm.
And then, like almost the next sentence, you said, I built an entire tracking app. So, tell me it feels like there's a bit of a gap there between like your profession and like what you're building here for the food allergy community. Tell me about how you closed that gap and like built something like this because I think it's truly incredible.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yes, so occupational therapy. I don't have a tech background. I don't have a business background actually. But I was able to, with advanced like AI coding software, learn to basically build the program myself. And I had to do it that way because I was not in a place business-wise to be investing a lot of money to build a startup and hire a developer. This was truly out of a personal need and a problem solving just mentality that I have as an occupational therapist of just identifying a problem and a solution, and me building it myself just made the most sense financially for my family, and really just bootstrapping and starting from the bottom. And I'm still in that stage of just trying to get the word out to moms who need it. So yeah.
And I know that families are going to ask this for sure. You alluded to it a little bit. So, your first kiddo, you navigated a cow milk protein allergy and the symptoms around that. Your second kiddo, though, you alluded to the fact that dairy and soy elimination did not get you there. So, tell me a little bit more about your journey with your kiddos and what the main trigger was for kiddo number two.
Yeah, thank you. So, kiddo one, exactly. I cut dairy. I think 4 weeks later, I cut soy, and she ended up being fine. And we were able to eventually reintroduce those back into my diet and her diet down the road. And with my second, who's now 15 months old, so this was around, honestly, it happened earlier than with the first, around 4 weeks old. She was already mucus, crying all night, gassy. And we went through that journey of starting asking with the pediatrician. They tested the diaper, the occult blood was positive. So right away, I was ready. I had done it with the first. I cut out dairy, thinking, I know what to do. This is fine. I know it's going to be a bullseye in terms of how to handle it. And unfortunately, that wasn't the case. So I started with dairy again, soy again. And I think that's when I knew the first time after a few weeks of eliminating those, 2 weeks, you start, sometimes even sooner, you start seeing those improvements. And I just wasn't seeing them. And in fact, the more I eliminated, the worse symptoms got, which I know
Mhm.
is because I wasn't aware that oats was one of the triggers. So, and I know that's a lot of what your family struggle with as well. And so, but it was just even just trying to remember, like, when exactly had I cut dairy, like on what day, and were the symptoms getting better or worse? Like I had this general sense, but I was so sleep deprived, so stressed. I not only had this infant, but I also had a toddler running around and working. And so again, that led me to just like wanting to see it all in one place, wanting to see the timeline, wanting to see the timestamps, wanting to all the pictures even in one place, right? Because I would be going to appointments and trying to scroll through like family portraits and like this and that just to find the diapers with the mucus and the rashes and yeah, just again, really wanting a unified, organized way to have everything in one place and to track it all in one place.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And you mentioned something that I think is really important in the journey of food reactivity. Two big things that I want to pull out of what you mentioned was one, that kiddo number two started on a different timeline, right? Which can be super confusing for parents because it's important to note that while some kiddos can like literally they're born and then we've got symptoms, a vast majority of kiddos, it's a few months in, and it isn't uncommon for it to even start at different times. So for me, I know that with my oldest, it was a few weeks in that like we really started to have problems, and with my youngest, it was almost immediately. And with more commonly is actually like around 2 to 3 months old, right? And so the reason why that's so confusing that is for us, we're like, I haven't done anything differently. Like it couldn't possibly be my diet because I'm eating the same thing that I was this whole time that I've been postpartum. So it couldn't possibly be that. When in reality, it's the development of the immune system that eventually gets to the point of their immune system misidentifying, a portion of a protein as a threat and then responding accordingly. And that timeline can start at any point, especially in the first year of life. So, and the research shows that the first reactivity is typically about 80% of those of us who are going to have reactivity are going to have it in that first year. But
Mhm.
when in that first year is not always the same. And so I appreciate that you brought that up. And then the other thing that you mentioned that is important is that as we start an elimination diet, if dairy and soy isn't it, right, or isn't the only triggers, then it isn't uncommon for our elimination diet to then cause the symptoms to get worse.
Right.
And oftentimes that's because we are making up for the removal of foods by increasing the amount that we're eating of the other foods that we have in our diet typically. I experience this too, especially I mean, really with both kiddos, but the first kiddo, like much more so because we ended up eventually admitted to the hospital, but like removed dairy, and they're like, "Yep, that's the thing." And she spiraled and got worse really quickly, and that isn't super uncommon because we go remove dairy, and now instead of oats or instead of like yogurt in the morning, for example, I'm having oatmeal in the morning, and then maybe I'm having some oatmeal cookies in the afternoon, and maybe like an oatmeal protein bite in the evenings, and all of a sudden my oat intake is massively increased and our symptoms get way worse because oats is actually the trigger. So I appreciate that you mentioned both of those things
Yeah.
along your journey.
Yeah, it's something I'm seeing with my users too, because, they will contact me or they'll comment on an Instagram post of exactly what you just said. Like they are cutting things and it's not getting, and not only is it not getting better, but it's getting worse. And I always try to point out, and I know you do too, is having them look at like, well, what have they increased their intake in? So maybe they weren't eating oats at all. Or even I know not everyone starts by eliminating soy, but maybe they are then drinking soy milk when they cut out dairy. So, yeah, just that increasing that awareness to their diet in general. And that's why I think it's important for moms who are curious at all about how their diet is impacting baby symptoms is to just start tracking because every bite is a data point at that point, and you can basically see instead of just worrying like, oh, like is this meal going to impact? Like it may or may not, but you will have the concrete, objective information of exactly what you ate at what time and what happened in the time span afterwards. So,
Yeah, 100%. And so I'd really love to dig a little bit deeper into like what exactly is tracking, like what are we tracking? Why are we tracking? What is it utilized for? So let's start with when you're utilizing MapMyMilk,
mhm.
which is a beautiful interface, by the way, I want to mention. You're utilizing MapMyMilk and you're new to this, right? You're like just getting started, you're on the app, you're starting to track. What exactly are parents tracking on MapMyMilk?
Yeah. So There's basically two major groups of information, which is intake, which is either mom's diet. For most of the users, they are tracking their own diet. However, we do have, you can track baby solids as well if you're a little bit further down the road. And then there's also, of course, like breast milk formula or express pumped milk. So we have different sort of logging forms for each of those. But intake, you would think it's either your intake or baby's intake in whatever form it can be, and the timestamp. And then we are tagging, or a mom is tagging each meal with what triggers were in that meal. And she can do that manually. She can tap off, yes, it had dairy, soy, and gluten, or she can take a picture of the ingredient label and then it automatically captures all of the triggers and also their various names, right? So we know that dairy goes by a ton of different names. I mean, a lot of them have a bunch of different names that, soy doesn't always look like soy. It can say miso, egg is albumin. Like there's a ton of different things. And so moms can get into a tricky place where they think they've eliminated something, but they actually haven't because maybe they don't know all the names, or they're not always checking the labels because they wouldn't think it would be in there. So we know supplements, I know we've talked about this before. Supplements can have dairy or soy in them, even though you wouldn't think that. So that's why, again, tracking everything using the label scanner is going to highlight and make sure that you're really eliminating everything that you're trying to eliminate. If you're in an elimination stage, and a lot of moms are not in that stage yet, and that's fine. They really are just tracking to see what the patterns are. And so that's the intake side, tracking the intake side, including what are the allergens, what's the timestamp. Then you can also include any notes on brand or meal preparation, right? Was it a shared skillet where you had also used butter to cook someone else's eggs? And then the other sort of pillar of data collection is the symptomology. And that's also, what type of symptom, what severity level, timestamp, notes, and then also pictures. So pictures of a diaper, pictures of a rash, and then all those pictures are together in one place on the dashboard where you can quickly see. And I'll just talk really quickly about the dashboard as well, because we have some nice data widgets there. So we have a symptom trend calendar. So you can basically get a visual heat map of over the course of a week or over the course of a month, are symptoms getting better or getting worse? Are they getting more frequent? Are they getting less frequent? We have the photos widget, and then we also have a peak symptom time of day widget. So do symptoms tend to be early in the morning? Do they tend to be afternoon? Do they tend to be middle of the night? And I feel like that's helpful also for showing a free to feed consultant or just trying to get the big picture of what the patterns are so that you can help figure out basically how is it related to my own routines? How is baby symptoms related to my routines, my intake, and what I'm doing in my day, basically?
Yeah, yeah, I appreciate that. And for anyone who may be really early in their journey, then what are the like most common symptoms that you're tracking in the app?
Yeah, so we have mucus, stool, we've got vomiting, we've got reflux, pain. There's I want to say 10 common built-in symptoms that they can just tap, and then premium users can also save their own symptoms. So if it's something specific, I know a mom saved um, uh, hiccups as something that she was tracking, hiccups, or a specific type of crying. I saw someone saved hysterics as something specific that meant something to her, right? That
Yeah.
she wanted to know exactly what are the patterns with this hysterical crying, whatever that meant to her. So it's really meant to be customizable. And the same thing with triggers, right? So we have the common triggers that every mom can tap and track. And then again, these premium users can save their own trigger if there's something random that they're curious about that they want to keep tabs on. So, sesame is not typically, as you know, one of these like infant food reactive triggers. But if a mom maybe has my 15-month-old actually ended up being IG allergic to sesame. If there's a mom out there who has maybe family history of sesame and wants to keep an eye, that's just an example. Anyone with premium access can add as many custom triggers that they want to keep tabs on.
That's super helpful. I appreciate that. And so, what I want to kind of dive into next is some of the questions that we got from followers related to tracking and their next steps and their kind of journey. And so, a piece of that is like how tracking can be valuable at different iterations of your journey, right? And so, I know you and I have talked about kind of like three main phases of food reactivity, and you could probably break them up into about a bajillion phases of your food reactivity journey. But the way that oftentimes we look at it with Free to Feed is the first kind of beginning stages of like, am I navigating food reactivity and the beginning stages of elimination diets, right? So the reason why tracking is so valuable in that stage of your journey is first, and you already alluded to this, making sure that if we have eliminated something, we have completely eliminated something. Because all too often we will have families that come to us and they're like, yeah, I removed dairy and then I removed soy and then I removed wheat and then I removed egg and now I've removed this laundry list of things. And then if we have the ability to go back to a log where they've been tracking their intake, it is not uncommon for us to go back and be like, oh, we didn't actually remove dairy. This whole time we've had dairy in a supplement, and like you and I can be supplements because they literally can say dairy free on the front of the label and then use a dairy product because they are not beholden to any label standards in the same way that like most food manufacturers are. And even food manufacturers are not held to proper standards as it relates to allergen labels either. And so in that case, right, like it may very well be that you have continued to eliminate additional foods when the original food that you planned to eliminate wasn't fully removed. And so,
Mhm.
which is painful, right? It was super painful to be like, oh my gosh, this whole time I've just kept adding more foods when the prenatal that I'm having every day has dairy and soy in it. Very painful. So, like in that way, it can be super valuable. In addition to that, it can also be valuable to looking for trends, right? So, as you and I talked about, when you remove dairy and you start eating more oats, and now you're having it multiple times a day, and you're seeing symptoms spiking, for us to be able to like see that trend and be
Mhm.
like, oh, it's highly likely then, based on symptomology and your tracking, that oats is a part of your journey. Let's talk about next steps for oats. And what's valuable there then is that you're using your data. And without any data from you, like it's still navigatable. And in that case, we're oftentimes going by probability. And but having your data way more valuable to say like what's exactly happening with your particular kiddo. So anytime that we're working with a family, then oftentimes there's a few pieces of the journey that we're putting together to discuss an elimination diet. And the first is probability, right? So, like, based on symptomology, if your baby has vomiting, there's different foods that are more likely to cause them a trigger than if your baby has eczema. And different, even again, if there's both, right? If your baby has eczema
Mhm.
and vomiting. And so, navigating that, the next is tracking. If you have tracking data, even a little bit of tracking data can be super helpful to be like, okay, what are you eating on a regular basis? What's your diet look like? What's the symptomology look like based on what you are consuming right now? Um, and then the next piece being history, right? And so, which I really appreciate your background because you can understand as an OT like how valuable having that history from a patient or a client can be, because it can really inform next steps. And then the last and I would say most important piece out of all of this is the parent's mental health. And so having those three other pieces can really allow us to lean into and support the parent's mental health and physical well-being because elimination diets are they're hard. They
Yeah.
suck. Like elimination diet, there's nothing fun about elimination diets. They're incredibly triggering if you have a history of disordered eating. They're
Yeah.
incredibly hard if you have a previous kiddo with food allergies. I know I experienced like PTSD symptoms related to like even just opening a diaper, right? Like was
Mhm.
petrifying to me.
Yes.
And so really digging into like having those other three pieces so that we can say, how are you doing, right? Like, are you on the spectrum of food allergy journeys? Oftentimes it will shift in the where we are in the spectrum based on like symptoms and all of that. But oftentimes we're the two various sides of the spectrum are either a family who comes to us and is like, throw it all at the wall, right?
Hmm.
This is hard. I've already been doing elimination diet. I don't want to play anymore. I feel like I'm just bumbling around, which is totally
Mhm.
valid. Like, let's do a bigger, more broad elimination diet so I can feel really confident that we're going the right direction. And then
Yes.
there's the other side of the spectrum, which is like, if I have to eliminate one more thing, I'm gonna stab somebody with a fork.
Mhm.
Both totally valid, and being able to understand where somebody is in that spectrum can help identify, like, okay, what direction are we going with an elimination diet? And then
Mhm.
having those other three pieces, especially the tracking, helps us support that. Because if you're the family who's like, if I eliminate another thing, I'm going to stab somebody with a fork, I don't want to be like, well, we're going to have to go big and broad based on probability. I want to be able to zoom into your tracking and be like, this is it. This is what we're doing
Yes.
next, and this is why. And we have data
Yeah.
to support it, which is so valuable. The middle ground that I think is so valuable and important for tracking is trials. And so once we figure out, we get to baseline, fabulous, wonderful, that's amazing and incredible that you did that. Now it's a matter of oftentimes we've eliminated more than one thing, right? It's not uncommon for dairy and soy and oats and rice and, on
Right.
and on and on. And so then tracking is really valuable as it relates to like our intake and then our trials to see like are things better. And I love your heat map, right? I love the heat
Mhm.
map to see like are things like sliding, are things the
Right.
same, are we getting better or worse, are we status quo, in like a way that's data driven as opposed to like us being like, is
Trying
this
to
better?
remember.
Is this
Yeah.
better?
Yeah.
I don't know. I was up all night. Is that better than last week or worse than last week? I'm
Exactly.
exhausted and
Right.
hungry.
Yeah.
And so having something like a little bit more objective that can be helpful, and also to know when you did those trials. So I know for
Mhm.
me, back in the day, we would trial foods and I would be like, okay, the standard literature is that once you have identified a trigger, you should reintroduce it about 6 months after elimination. Like once you've confirmed, like, yep, for sure, oats is a problem. But then being like, when was that? Right?
Mhm.
Like it's
Mhm.
such a fog for so many reasons. I think our brain, because
Yes.
it is very traumatizing, our brain like shuts some of that down even.
Yes.
And so I remember going through my phone being like, when did I text my partner about blood and stool and oats? Like literally like looking up
Literally
oats in our
searching
text
it.
thread. Yes,
Yeah.
like where's the bloody diaper? Like where is it?
Yes.
And so for having one place where I can go back and be like, oh, we trialed oats on April 20th.
Mhm.
Fabulous, wonderful, got it. That can be really valuable in the trialing phase. And then the starting solids phase, solids are confusing, right? Like, especially if
Yes.
you're navigating food reactivity, you're going to see food in there and there's going to be changes in frequency and consistency and things like that. So being able to have a place where you're keeping pictures and you can see and you can feel confident, like, yep, we're doing the right thing and I know what we're trialing and I'm tracking it in one space. Because I'd love to talk to you too about like what are the alternatives here? Like
Right.
if we're not using MapMyMilk, like
Right.
I know what I've seen, but like what have you seen out in the wild for like the alternatives?
Yes, I feel like before building this, I tried the alternatives. So literally, I know there's like analog moms, pen and paper, which I get. Like I'm a post-it girl, but the problem, yeah, is swiping as well in the notes app. So literal, like a journal that you're bringing to a doctor that you're trying to flip through and then you're trying to read your handwriting, or the
And
notes
doesn't
app
have
you're trying to
pictures.
no, and then the notes app, you're trying to, it's just one long swipe of like, okay, what? But it's just the dates. And it's like, because moms have actually sent me pictures of their notes app, and I'm sure they use them with the
All the time.
consultants too. And it's just not user friendly. And then there are other apps that are great food and symptom trackers, but they're not geared towards the dyad. They're not geared towards the delay in symptoms. They're not geared towards this wide variability in time frame that we know exists, specifically with a breastfeeding mom and an infant. There was like an IBS, my symptoms, there's an IBS track. I did try those with Rose, with my 15-month-old, and it just, again, it wasn't user friendly. It was just pulling in. It was also looking at ingredients and triggers, but a wide range, not narrowed down to what we have, which is narrowed down to what we know is more common for infants dealing with this specific issue. So I think it was like some the specific app I'm thinking of was trying to tell me some chemical compound was like the most common. It just wasn't user friendly. It increased that level of anxiety and confusion, which like I'm so glad you're bringing up the mental health piece because I just feel like that is a huge part of this hurdle for any mom, for any family struggling, is just that feeling of overwhelm, anxiety, confusion. I feel like are the three main feelings that any of us who have been through it can relate to of just like I'm anxious about literally the health of my baby and what is going to be in the diaper. I'm confused about what's causing it, how to deal with, even if I know what's causing it, how am I cutting it out completely? For how long? When am I reintroducing it? And then just overwhelmed, just complete general. In OT, we talk about the mental load, the cognitive load of just going of different activities, and the cognitive load of trying to figure out your baby's trigger and manage it, even when you know what it is tremendous on top of just the cognitive load of postpartum fourth trimester in general. When you are sleep deprived, your hormones are raging. So, like, I'm so grateful that you guys exist because a tracking tool is a tracking tool, and MapMyMilk is not meant to identify the trigger or replace any kind of medical advice. Again, it's that like collation of data and of information in one organized place to bring to a free to feed consultant, to bring to your pediatrician, to bring to your GI appointment that you may be making because you again are so overwhelmed and nervous, or to an allergist or to lactation consultant, whatever. You are bringing this collated data all in one place, organized to someone who can then navigate it with you. And you guys especially do such a beautiful job of addressing that mental health piece and that cognitive overload because you have so many fantastic resources and guides for moms, especially on that. Just the elimination diet itself is just so confusing. And then you talk about like the misinformation that's out there on the internet right now. I know you and I both have strong feelings about the one Facebook group regarding misinformation and timelines. And moms need better, they need more support, and you guys are giving it to them. So I'm just so grateful. And I just want to, like, yeah, little plug for anyone who has not checked out your resources. It is tremendous and it's going to just break down that cognitive load a little bit. So
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, I appreciate that. And there's, unfortunately, a lot of the misinformation does add to a lot of that mental stress, right?
it,
So, I think that's a perfect segue to talk a little bit more about like timing, because that was a lot of the questions that we
yeah,
got was about timing and understanding timing, because while there are, unfortunately, many like obstacles and as of misinformation in this space, timing is probably up there top
number one.
tier
Yeah.
of not only ones that are most harmful to these journeys, but
Mhm.
also one that is like most prevalent in this space, right?
Yeah.
So we get everywhere from back to like talking about spectrums. I get everything from I was told that nothing transfers to my breast. Nothing that I eat can transfer to my breast. My breast milk is not made out of stomach contents, is what I was told. And so therefore, it's not possible. What I am experiencing is impossible, and or that it is my breast milk itself that's causing these symptoms. So we have that side of the spectrum, which is entirely
Right.
incorrect. And then we have the full other side of the spectrum, which is that everything transfers and that it's
Right.
there for weeks on
For
end.
months. Yeah.
Weeks and months. Yes, I've heard 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 8 weeks, I think is the longest that I've heard. And then everything in between. And like there's the spectrum of misinformation. And the truth lies in the middle, which is that everything that we consume can transfer to the breast. And it's still fascinating to me that that is a part of the misinformation because we have so much research,
Research. Yeah.
overwhelmingly decades of research that is
Mhm.
that shows here's gluten in breast
Clearly.
milk,
Yeah.
here's peanuts in breast milk. It's super
Right.
clear. Like there's no question as to whether or not it gets there. And there have been a few research pieces, like reviews that are like, well, it's not enough to elicit, like, it's not enough of this full protein to elicit an IgE mediated food allergy. And the truth is, like, yeah, 100%, because we're not transferring the full version of the protein to our breast. It would be really strange if you consumed a peanut and that peanut protein in its full form made it to your breast. No, your body's
Right.
going to break that peanut down significantly to a small fragment of itself. And that's what the research overwhelmingly over and over again is like, yep, it's there. We see it. We see it. And we are so acknowledging that we see it that we've moved past do we see it and we're into like the can it reduce future allergies and what are the, big impacts and like way past that scientifically. So that part is fascinating to me. Then the other
Mhm.
side of the spectrum, and I was also, quite frankly, I'm nail on the head. I was a victim of this verbiage too, with my first baby when June was navigating this a decade ago of like, oh, if you consume something, it's going to be in your breast milk for weeks or months on end. And even like I was in my last year of grad school, my whole specialty is proteins. And in that fog of like at the hospital, blood and stool, massive eczema, weeping and affected, crying, me, her, everyone's crying. Um, I didn't question it in the moment, right? I didn't
No.
question like that
Yeah.
doesn't actually even make sense. Even if I wasn't a protein expert, that doesn't make sense that like alcohol, flavonoids, and all these other molecules that we've studied peak and clear in the breast milk really quickly, but for some reason, dietary proteins are like hanging on in there for
Right.
weeks and weeks on end. And in that case, like, is our milk just made out of dietary proteins? Because if you eat, you're eating constantly, right,
Right.
throughout those
Right.
weeks,
And it's
then it's just
staying there.
culminating in
Right.
there.
Right.
And so it doesn't make sense. And even, but like 100%, even as this finishing up, my PhD and focused on proteins, I didn't question it. I was like, okay, heard, got it, moving forward. And unfortunately, the two big things there is like one, absolutely not the case. And we'll get into the timing and the actual research here in just a second. But two, that verbiage is so harmful to
Yeah.
breastfeeding journeys. This verbiage of it never transfers is harmful because you are dismissing the parent, you are making them feel like they're crazy.
Yeah,
When
you're
like
gaslighting them. Yeah.
yeah, you're gaslighting them. I swear when I eat this food, this happens. Like,
Right.
what do you mean it doesn't get there?
Right.
So that's super harmful to our breastfeeding journeys because we're like, okay, well then if it's just our milk, like I can't keep breastfeeding, obviously.
Right.
And then on the other side, it's harmful to our breastfeeding journeys because that means a couple of things that when I hear that, I hear like, oh, well, then I can't breastfeed while my milk is quote unquote clearing for weeks or months on end, which isn't true. And then
Mhm.
two, it also, in my mind, meant that if I had a mistake, that it would
Right.
quote, contaminate my milk for
For
a
months.
really
Yeah.
long time. And
Right.
that made food petrifying.
Yeah.
Like, can't eat out. Oh my God, what if I get the wrong latte from somewhere? What if somebody cooked on that skillet that you mentioned with some butter? Like, does I'm gonna have dairy in my milk for weeks on
Mhm.
end then if I make a mistake. And the bar then, especially for, what for us, we were literally admitted to the hospital like it completely wrecked my relationship with food. Like food is
Oh, yeah.
petrifying now. And so like both sides of the spectrum are super, super
Harmful.
detrimental to our journeys. And
Yeah.
so I want to talk a little bit about like what the actual timing is, and then I'd love to
Mhm.
dig into like what you've utilized that timing with in the actual app itself.
Yeah.
So what we know is that from research on many different foods, where we've looked at timing, the fastest that we've ever seen transfer, which is super fascinating and nerdy to me, is 10 minutes. And so, which is bonkers because it like literally
Wild.
means that like if you sit down for a meal and you're having like a steak, for example, and it takes you more
Right.
than 10 minutes and you're chatting with people and stuff, you could literally have transferred that food to your breast milk in the time that it took you to eat that meal, right?
Right.
You sit down, it's, an hour-long meal at a restaurant. By the time you left that restaurant, you're well in the thick of that having transferred, which is
Yeah.
fascinating to me. So 10 minutes is the fastest that we've ever seen it transfer and start to be traceable in your milk. And then usually what we see is it peaks within a few hours and it steadily plummets from there. Usually gone within an 8-hour window for most of us. And for
Mhm.
outliers, we see 24 hours across most of the research. And so then that being the transfer timing for like you eating something and something coming out of your milk. Now, a couple of the like nuances there is that one one of the differences for this type of molecule is that the number one thing that removes dietary proteins from the breast is breast milk removal itself. And that's important to mention too, because when we're working with families, obviously, if you hear 8 hours, right? If you hear like you can clear within 8 hours, many people do clear within 8 hours of consumption. Then to me, I hear like, well, if my baby's sleeping overnight and not feeding overnight, I can have myself a big old cheesy pizza, which of course I want, and then not feed overnight and then feed in the morning, which is important to note that all of the research is showing that that's the timeline if you're regularly removing breast milk. Never ever saying that parents should pump and dump because I'm not on camp pump and dump. I'm pump and save. So if you
Mm-hmm.
know that you're doing, you're consuming something, you need to pump, you need to save, I would write dairy and whatever else you ate all over that or in your tracking, right? I could label that
Hmm.
bag and have it in the tracking,
Yes.
and be able to go back and be like, what did I eat before that bag? Um, and then know and be able to track and see like what does that timing actually look like for me, because it is going to be a little bit different for each individual based on metabolism and hydration, how often you're feeding, and a billion other factors. And then I think part of where the confusion comes from is the actual trigger reaction timing and healing timing. And so we know that
Mhm.
there's two different types of reactions. There's an acute reaction that happens fast and heals fast. Usually that's going to happen within a couple, either immediately when the baby is consuming or a couple of hours after ingestion. And then the chronic reactions take longer to happen, take longer to heal. The sweet spot for reactions is usually like 6 to 8 hours after ingestion. So we're talking blood and stool, mucousy stool, diarrhea, constipation, some rashes. And but can take up to 48 hours if, like, for example, your baby's not stooling every day, right? So if it takes a full
Right.
day for your baby to stool, you may not see it for, however long it takes for you to get the goods to know if
Right.
there's blood in there. Now, the confusion then comes from in those chronic reactions. That is a literal wound in that system, whether it's a wound on the skin, right? Because you're breaking the skin is red, it's inflamed, that is a wound, or a wound in the gastrointestinal system, right? In the GI tract that's causing blood and stool, that's causing mucousy stool. And that takes time to heal. And that
Right.
timeline to heal is usually directly related to like how severe was the reaction in the first place, right? If, for
And
example,
how
your kiddo
chronic,
has,
right?
yeah, for
Yeah.
a chronic reaction. And so if your kiddo has like a little bit of rosy cheeks, right? And like a little prickly kind of reaction that they're seeing there versus like full-blown eczema that's weeping and infected, one might heal within a 24 hours, 48-hour window, and the other one might take weeks for full healing because full cell regeneration takes like usually 28 days or so for that to like fully replenish themselves. And so in that way, I think that's like part of the confusion of timing is understanding what the healing timeline looks like for your kiddo. And I think
Right.
some people have taken that healing timeline and seen that personally with their baby. Like, well, we had really bad blood in stool and it took several weeks for the blood to totally heal, and translated that to, well, it must be because it's still in my breast. Instead of it's because my baby has to heal and it's a little wound in the gastrointestinal system that needs to close up and heal fully. And so, and the unfortunate part is that for some, it feels like they've doubled down on it, and they're like, "Nope, that's it. That's what it is. It's timeline to the breast, and it's clearance to the breast that's not happening." Which is frustrating at best. That's like the kindest thing that I can say about it. So I would love to talk then about like how you've incorporated timeline. One, not only like that timeline that we just talked about, but two, the fact that there is nuance, right? To
Yeah.
depending on the type of reaction you're having and depending on your kiddo's timeline. So tell me a little bit more about how you're navigating that in the app.
Yeah. So so we have our food log and symptom log forms. We have a history page where you can see everything in chronological order. We have the dashboard, which we already discussed. And then we have this analysis page, which shows all of the triggers, and you can click into each one and see all this, like all these widgets of information. So for each specific trigger, for instance, you would see a page for oats and it would say how many times you ate it, how many of those times were followed by symptoms, what type of symptom is most common following oats, typical severity, like average severity, followed by oats. And then we have dashboards of information on timing. Now, in terms of, we made it very customizable. So we have three timing presets. Basically, you can look at what's happening in a fast window after intake, what's happening in a average window up to 24 hours after intake, and then a longer preset up to 48 hours. And moms can one click see how the data changes. If I want to look at what's happening in a shorter window, medium, long, click, 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 and it completely changes the information instantly. So you can see the correlations there based on time. We can also set a completely customizable with the help of a consultant. If you guys want to dig in to narrow in on exactly what's going on in that 6 to 8 hour window where you said that's really the peak, you can do that. You can say, I just want to see 6 to 8 hours after intake, what's most correlated. And then the other piece that I wanted to talk about related to pumping and the removal of breast milk is that we built that in as well. So on your food log, there is a little toggle that says direct correlation. You can turn that off and you can say, my baby is not going to nurse from me for the next 24 hours. Instead, I'm going to, you know, take this expressed milk and store it. And what the app does automatically is it attaches everything from your diet. It's because that's already in the system, all the triggers from your diet in the past 24 hours, and it is sort of linking those triggers to that expressed milk, which is then going into your fridge or freezer. And then later on, you can say, my baby drank this milk, which was expressed 2 weeks ago at this time, and automatically it is then capturing, well, these were the triggers that were in there. So it's a great way if moms are trialing it, exactly what you're talking about of, maybe eating that pizza and saving it for later on. And so removing it so that, when she goes to nurse her baby later on after peak, hopefully there's no symptoms, which is, a great thing to trial with a consultant. She can then, know exactly what was in that milk for when she eventually goes, perhaps after a challenge or a reintroduction goes to give, she knows what was in that milk. Because there's no way, going back to like other alternatives for tracking, there's no way you're going to find the journal page or the notes app from if you're giving it weeks or months later. So yeah, it's sort of a done for you in the app.
Which is incredible because yes, that's oftentimes, yeah, we're using express milk at different points of time and it can be super confusing because you're like, oh no, what did I eat back then? And what was it? And am I still kind of feeling like I'm like starting over now? Because who
Yes.
knows, right? So I really appreciate that. And in that same vein, then, one of the common questions that we got, like as you're tracking and you're looking at like correlation and that timeline that you mentioned, um, one of the questions that we got in the stories was like, well, what if there's two foods that are like kind of rising to the top, right? Do I have to eliminate them both, or like what's the next steps, and what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, so I'm not surprised you got that question. I get that question a lot too, and it's because on our analysis page, it's not showing you this is the trigger, this is not. It's showing you mathematical correlations, basically, which if your baby is having symptoms every day and those are getting logged objectively, just scientifically, what you eat every day is going to be correlated. And so moms who are starting this early on are going to see a lot of triggers showing up as like, a moderate or strong connection there. And that's exactly why we are partners with Free to Feed, which is that you need to be bringing these logs to a dedicated professional who's going to sit down and give you that one-on-one support and look through it with you and go through what is likely in terms of your studies that you've shared already about in terms of I know you have mentioned before that not everything, and I don't know if you want to speak briefly on this, but not everything gets transferred all the time. And so there's different ways to look at the data, and that is why that one-on-one support is so important. So, yes, if you're using the app and if baby is very symptomatic or at least once a day, there's going to be a lot of correlations, and it's a matter of working through that list with a free to feed consultant or with someone who really has experience with this food reactivity who can sort of guide you into the next steps.
Yeah, I appreciate that. And that's why when we were talking earlier about like that early journey, we were talking about
Mhm.
like four different components, right? And the tracker is so vital, but it's only one of four different components that we're taking into account when we're choosing next steps for an elimination diet. And so directly to your point, right? Like it is not surprising that mathematically we're going to see correlation to many foods, especially if you're eating the same foods on a regular basis, which is not uncommon when you're in the elimination diet space where you're like, hey, I just kind of like get into a food rut and I just do
Yes.
the thing that I'm doing every day because I don't want to read another ingredient tag
Yes.
for the love
Mhm.
of God, right? Like, can I please just have a day where I'm just eating? And so I totally get that. So that makes sense that we would have various foods that are going to kind of bubble up to the top if you're eating them on a regular basis, and the symptoms are on a daily basis as well. And so, yes, to your point, then, when we're looking at that correlation, we're taking into account probability, we're taking into account the history and what have you actually seen. And I appreciate you bringing up the nuance of transferability, right? Because the other thing that's really vital here, anytime we're talking about tracking, is to acknowledge the fact that in all of the research that we've seen, um, if you take 100 people and you give them all peanuts, about half of them transfer. In a more recent study that I kind of highlighted on Instagram, they had 12 individuals and three of them didn't transfer in that particular study. Now, if you took those same 12 individuals and did the study again, it would probably be three different people that didn't transfer that one time, which is what we're seeing in the research, right? That not every time you eat do you transfer to the breast. And so not everything that we put in our mouth ends up in the breast. Now, that being said, I also want to mention too that we're all transferring. And so it isn't that like there's this holy grail of human that doesn't transfer proteins to their breast. I wish there was that, right?
Right.
Because then I would be like, do this, and then you too can be the ha ha that doesn't,
Right.
transfer to the breast. Unfortunately, though, that's not the case. We are all transferring because we are meant to absorb the food that we consume, right? We are meant to absorb fractions of the proteins that we consume because they have jobs in our body, in the circulatory system, in the body, in the cellular response. They all have jobs. If we were not absorbing our nutrients that we're consuming, we wouldn't be a living organism. So
Right.
that's supposed to happen, which I think is another like different misnomer and misinformation that I could like jump up and down and scream
Yeah.
about. Um, but it's important to note that like one, we all transfer, and two, we all don't transfer at the same time. Where sometimes we're eating something and it transfers, and sometimes we're eating something and it doesn't. So what that means then for tracking is that I could have something on Tuesday and not see a reaction, and then I could have something, the same food, I could have peanuts again on Thursday and I do see a reaction, and that's so confusing. And so for free to feed, then what we're doing is we're looking at the log and we're working backwards. And so instead of saying like if peanuts, then blood and stool, we're saying if blood and stool, what was consumed before that? And never going just based on like, well, we had peanuts this one day and didn't see a response, so it can't be peanuts because we know that you're not always transferring. And that little bitty like nuance can really make or break an elimination diet because it can be so confusing to be like, yeah, but I had it this one day and we had a great
Right.
day. And we'll
Right.
like, stake our claim on that because we finally had a good day, right? Like,
Right.
well, I ate all these things and we had one magical, perfect day, perfect
Mhm.
poop, all that fun stuff. So, like, that's what I'm going to eat every day for the rest of my existence. And turns out, like, that doesn't actually get you there because your transfer is different day to day, which of course it is because A,
Right.
this journey is confusing and B, biological functions, right? And
Right.
so, with that, I really appreciate that you brought that up. When, um, as we're thinking about like next steps for families, really would love for you to share, like where people can find you and to get tracking. And I also want to mention, like, as you're talking about like finding you guys on your website and your app, would also love to mention that like regardless as to where you are in your journey, starting to track now, if you haven't been, or if you have on any of these other modalities, is so valuable because let's say like I'm in a happy place right now, like we're at baseline, things are going pretty well. It can still be really valuable for me to be tracking right now because what if tomorrow we have a blood in stool and I'm just racking my brain like, oh, what did I eat and what could it possibly be? Do I have a new trigger? That's a common question. Like, could I just suddenly have a new trigger? Was there something in a new ingredient deck, right? So tell us where people can find you and then, kind of next steps.
Yes, thank you so much for bringing up that last point about the importance of tracking in good days and bad days. Because if you're not tracking what you're eating leading up to suddenly you have symptoms going on, you really can't see, well, oh, maybe some of these foods were safe the whole time. And again, we go back to this cognitive load of trying to remember that you really can't. I've tried to do it before I built this. You can't keep it all up there. So I recommend anyone who's curious or worried. Or thinks they might have an issue, but it's intermittent, don't wait till the next symptom. Start tracking now. It's as simple as just logging your food, logging the symptoms. I tried to make the interface as fast and simple as possible, keeping that mental burden in my mind. And I'm always iterating it and making it even better. So, yes, you can go to mapmymilk.com. You create an account with just your email address. We don't ask for any other personal health information, and you get a 14-day free trial with all premium features just to test it out, right? Like I know some apps have a paywall right up front. We really want you guys to test it out and see if you like it. And then at the end of 14 days, you can choose to pay $7.99 per month to keep all the premium features. And if you don't need that, that's fine. You also have the option for basic tracking for free all the time. So your data stays there. You're just not going to get sort of the ability to export reports. You're not going to get some of these premium things, but you can always track for free at the end of your trial. And there is a coupon code if you're a free to feed user. You guys get 20% off. And yeah, I would just say, I always love feedback. So if anyone is using the app and is confused by something, like shoot me a DM, shoot me an email, because I'm always just all about making this better for the users. So yeah,
Yeah, and it's us, right? Like I think that's important to mention is that like if you reach out to MapMyMilk, if you reach out to Free to Feed, you're talking to us.
it's
So
literally me.
it's literally me. Yeah, yeah, exactly, exactly. Like you're talking to us. We're here.
Yeah.
We understand. We get it.
Yeah.
And so the frantic emails, like yes, 100%
Been
feel
there.
you in my soul, and
Mhm.
we're gonna get you to a better space. So,
Yeah.
with that, thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. It's massively needed. It's massively appreciated. I have just like so much respect for fellow female founders who see and experience a problem and then push forward into solution, even when it's not your area of expertise, right? No business experience over here, any of
Yeah.
that. And yes, like have built things that I never imagined that I would build with my background. So massive kudos to you.
Thank
And
you.
to all of our listeners, I want to, of course, make sure that I say that wherever you are in your journey today, you're doing an amazing job. I'm so very proud of you. I'm proud of you for being here. I'm proud of you for navigating this insanity. You are not alone, and we're here to help. So reach out if you need us, and we'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.